Hi!
What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. In this video, I'm going to be building my brand new gaming PC, and as I build it, I'm going to show you guys how I do it myself, give you some tips and tricks along the way to make the process a little bit more easy and maybe enjoyable. Everything in front of me on the table is going to be going in my gaming PC, but before we get to building, it's always good to know the parts. Now, one of the most tedious processes when building a gaming PC is knowing what PC parts to choose, if they're well balanced or if they'll give you good performance. And to simplify all of that to you guys, I'm going to be leaving 3 different PC builds down below in the description, one for a $1,000 budget, one for a $2,000 budget, and one for a $3,000 budget. So if you're interested in that, it'll be down there. But before I tell you about the parts that I chose for this build, a quick word from today's video sponsor, IFIXIT, with their brand new FixHub Power Series soldering toolkit, allowing you to do any soldering work remotely. It comes with a 55-watt portable power station that can heat up your soldering pin in 5 seconds, and it allows you to control the temperature of the soldering, and giving you up to 8 hours of soldering without recharging. And this toolkit comes with everything that you need, whether it's safety equipment, cleaning equipment, and everything that you need to get the job done. So if you're like me and you like to fix your own technology when it breaks, this soldering kit from iFixit is the perfect solution. Learn more about it in the description below. For our CPU, I'm going to be using the Intel 13900K, and I am moving this CPU from my previous PC to this PC. It's a 24-core CPU. I'm quite aware that the AMD 9800X3D would have been a better option, but I already had this CPU on hand, and honestly, I've been using it for the last year and a half, and for gaming, editing, and coding, it's been really good. I personally haven't experienced any throttling issues. For the motherboard, we're going a little bit high-end. This is the ROG Strix Z790A Gaming Wi-Fi 2 motherboard. It has a black and white design that looks super sleek in my opinion. And 2 of the main reasons why I went for this motherboard is, 1, the back I/O has a ton of USB ports, so I'm never gonna have to worry about running out because I use a ton of them in my setups. And reason number 2 is this motherboard is equipped with Wi-Fi 7 connection, and unfortunately where my PC sits, I have to use Wi-Fi, so getting the best of the best when it comes to Wi-Fi is a must for me. Not to mention it has an RGB ROG logo, which we all know it adds FPS, so great choice. Now, to be 100% honest with you guys, Asus did send these PC parts to be in this build, but they have no say about what I say about these products. They will not see this video before it's posted. They just wanted to provide the parts for this video, so thank you, Asus. Anyway, moving on to the AIO, we're going to be using the ROG Strix LC3 368 RGB LCD. That's a heck of a name. This AIO has a 2.1-inch IPS screen in the middle that you can display GIFs, pictures, or system information on there, so temperature, GPU temperature, whatever you're gonna put on there. And it also comes with 3 120mm ARGB fans. The pump itself is the Aztec 7th V2 Gen pump, which is supposed to be a little bit more quiet and more efficient. And one thing that I noticed about this AIO that other AIOs don't provide is it comes with a 6-year warranty, which is pretty awesome, to be honest. Now, for the GPU, I'm gonna be using this beast of a GPU. This is the RTX 4090, 24 gigs of VRAM, and this is not a brand new GPU. I actually was using this in my previous PC build, and if you're wondering what model this one is, it used to be a Gigabit Black Edition, and I actually took it apart and spray painted it into white, and honestly, it turned out really well. I have been using the 4090 for the last year, and there's no better GPU than the 4090 currently. I didn't want to wait for the next generation and have to pay $2,000 for the best GPU, and in my case, I'm actually going to be mounting it on a vertical mount that I got here that we're going to be putting in the case later on, just because I personally prefer GPUs mounted vertically for that, you know, extra oomph in the aesthetic. For the RAM, I'm going to be sticking with these 2 sticks. It's 32 gigs running at 5600 megahertz per second. So this is plenty for what I need, and I've been using these for the last year and they've been really good to me. For our SSDs, these are also going to be migrating from my old PC. I have 5TB of M.2 SSD in the PC, and I do not want to lose my stuff, so I'm going to be migrating all these to the new PC. Now, to power everything, we're going to be using this crazy power supply. This is the ROG Strix 1000 Oral White Edition, and this thing is crazy. First of all, it has built-in RGB on it, which I've never seen that on a power supply. It's a fully modular power supply with ATX 3.0 compatibility, and the nice thing is that the cables that come included in this power supply are sleeve covered and they're white, and the tips are white as well, so everything's gonna have this full white look. So not to mention it has a 10-year limited warranty, and that's a big seller in my opinion for any power supply. Warranty is key because these things, if they fail, they can break other things, so having a good warranty that is long is great in my opinion. Now lastly, everything that I just showed you is going to be going into this PC case. This is the Asus Stuff 302 case, and it has this really cool industrial design that I'm a huge fan of, and it comes included with 4 pre-installed 140mm ARGB fans, 3 in the front, 1 in the back. And one of my other favorite things about this case is all the cutouts that you get. There's a ton of cutouts right here, there's cutouts on the bottom, and even cutout right in the front and behind the fans, so you are getting a lot of openings to route cables. Now that we've talked about all the parts, it's time to actually build this PC. I'm going to be walking you guys how I do my own PC builds. Now keep in mind, everybody does it differently. This is just the way I've been doing it for the last few years, and I feel like it's the fastest, easiest way for me. Now keep in mind, every experience is going going to be a little bit different, but let's get started. I have divided my PC building process into multiple sections. Section number 1 is motherboard preparation. And to get started, I highly recommend doing this on like a kitchen table or a desk table or anything that has a lot of space, just to make the whole process a little bit easy. And I personally actually wear my shoes. These are rubber like Crocs shoes, and just to prevent any static from happening. But if you're worried about static, you can buy like a $5 anti-static bracelet that you can wear while you're doing it. I've done this many times without a static bracelet and it's been fine. Let's start by taking the motherboard out of the box. Now that you've taken the motherboard out of the box, I personally recommend actually using the box just as a platform for preparing the motherboard. Take the motherboard out of this bag. The first step is going to be installing the CPU on the motherboard. The way to know how to install the CPU on the motherboard, you want to locate one of the corners that has an arrow on it. Most of the time, it's the bottom left side of the processor socket. And on the processor itself, there's also going to be an arrow on one of the corners. Align both arrows in the same corner, and that's how it's supposed to fit. Start by opening the CPU holder by pushing out on the handle and lifting it like this. Open up the CPU holder and simply hold the CPU above the socket like that, where the arrows are matching, and it should just drop right in. Just like that. And if it's not fully in, you'll be able to identify it right away. Then move the CPU contact frame over, push it a little bit so the piece of plastic that's covering it comes off, like this. Make sure it's under the latch right here. And then push with the handle to secure the CPU in place. That is it. The CPU is ready to go. Now let's install the RAM. If you're going to be installing only 2 sticks of RAM, you want to make sure that you have 1 space empty between them. That way the RAM sticks are running on the same DDR5 channel and giving you the best speeds possible, with the lowest latency possible as well. To install the RAM, start by releasing the latches that hold the RAM sticks. Some motherboards only have latches at the top and not on the bottom, so in that case, only release the top one. Then grab your first RAM stick and carefully insert it into the first slot where the pins align where the notch is. You can see that I had to use some force to install the RAM, and that is okay, just be careful as you're doing it. There we go. Next, let's install the M.2 SSDs. Start by locating the M.2 SSD slots on your motherboard. Mine are here, here, and here. If your motherboard has pre-installed tapes on the heating pad like this one, make sure to remove it. It's usually a blue color. Then grab your M.2 SSD and insert it into the slot, like this, and then now in my case, my motherboard does not use screws to hold down M.2 SSDs, but it uses latches like this. But some motherboards use screws to hold M.2 SSDs down, so keep that in mind. Our storage is installed. Now the final step in the motherboard preparation is something that's very important, and that is actually installing the cooler bracket that you're going to be using on the motherboard before you put the motherboard in the case. It will just make your life much easier. So let's grab that out of the cooler. Now these are the brackets that come with the cooler. You have the Intel LG1700 one, and you also have the AMD AM5 one. In my case, I'm obviously going to be using the LGA 1700, and you're also going to grab the matching standoffs for your CPU. Again, in my case, it's the LGA 1700. Grab the bracket and insert it through the holes from the back of the motherboard like this. After you do that, screw in the standoffs. Tighten them as much as you can with your hand and don't use any tools for this step, because if you try to tighten it too much, you might break the plastic in the back. Okay, now that we did this, we are done with section 1 and we can put the motherboard on the side and start preparing the case. Make sure to put your motherboard on the side somewhere safe where it can't be touched or damaged by anything. Okay, section 2, case preparation. But we're actually not going to start with the case. We're going to be starting with the power supply. This is a highly recommended step to do before you do anything with the case, and that is take your power supply out and plug all the cables into the right plugs, and then mount the power supply into the case. So let's do that. Whew, this thing is gorgeous. And it's made out of aluminum, so it's way lighter than you'd expect. These cables are so nice. They are sleeved and the tips are white as well, and they look super high quality, which is really nice. Now at this point, you need to figure out what cables you're going to be using with your power supply. Obviously, you're going to be using the motherboard power, which is a 24-pin one that looks like this. Depending on your motherboard, you might need 1 or 2 CPU power cables. In my case, I do need 2 because my motherboard supports 2 power cables to my CPU, so I'm going to be using 2 of those. And then you're going to need the power to the graphics card. In my case, I'm going to be using the 12-volt cable that is included, but if you have a different GPU that uses PCIe cables, then you want to use these cables. And lastly, and most likely, you will be needing a SATA power cable to power the fans or any hubs or anything that has to do with RGB that is in your case, so I'm going to be using one of these. For the rest of the cables, make sure to put them somewhere safe because you might need them in the future, and most power supplies are not compatible with other cables, so make sure to hold on tight to these things. Next, we want to take all these cables and plug them into all the dedicated spots on the back of the power supply. Then slide the power supply into the designated spot. Sometimes it's on the side, sometimes on the bottom. Wherever you put it, just make sure that the fan is facing outwards. So that could be the bottom, that could be the back, that could be the side. In my case, it's the bottom. So let's do that. Before I put the power supply in, I'm actually going to be removing the hard drive tray just to give me more space for cable management. I usually do that because I use SSDs and not hard drives. And you can save this on the side if you decide to use hard drives in the future. Now you can put in the power supply. Now you want to align the holes on the back of the power supply to the holes of the case, then use the screws that came with your power supply to install it on there. Next, we're going to be preparing the AIO so we can put that in the case. To prepare the AIO, you're going to need to install all the fans on the cooler. And depending on how you're going to mount the radiator in the case, this will be different. In my case, I'm going to be mounting it on the top right here, and the exhaust is going to be off the top, and the tubing is going to be over here. So I need my fans mounted this way, so the air is coming in and it's coming out right here. Just make sure to install the fans on the AIO where the air is getting pushed out through and not pulling air through the AIO. So in my case, the AIO is going to be mounted like this, which means I need to mount my fans this way. And the reason for that is because the cables of the fan will be pointed towards the back of the case, and we can round the cables easy that way. You're going to be using the long screws that came with the AIO. They're going to go through the hole and they're going to mount on the radiator. Just be careful not to tighten them too much because you can puncture the actual radiator. Now that the fans are mounted to the AIO, let's put it in the case and screw it to the top of the case using the screws that were provided with the AIO. Take the top cover off the case. As you're putting the AIO in, grab all the cables so they're not in the way of anything. Grab one of the screws on the washers and while holding the AIO, install one. Then do the other side. Now you can do the rest of the screws. Then put the top cover back on. Now the last thing we're gonna do before putting the motherboard into the case is we're gonna prepare all the cables. So all the cables that need to go from the back to the front, so the ones that are gonna go into the bottom of the motherboard, to the power of the motherboard or to the graphics card, we're gonna wrap those into the appropriate holes on the case. And then the ones that are gonna go from the front to the back, like the fans, ones from over here or from the front, we're gonna wrap those to the back. That way we can plug everything. It's super easy after we put the motherboard in and we're not trying to hurt our fingers trying to figure out how to pass a cable through a tiny hole. So let's do that real quick. Through this hole, we're gonna route the CPU power cables. And I'm actually going to be using the Lee & Lee RGB streamer cables for an extra oomph of the case. So these are RGB cables. So I'm going to plug those directly into the 24 pin that came with the power supply, and the 12 volt cable is going to be plugged into the 12 volt cable that came with the power supply. And for the front panel and the HD audio cables, I'm going to run into the bottom right here. And I routed all the fan cables from the front to the back right here. And I'm actually going to wire all of them to the fan splitter cable that was included in the AIO, which is this one. And now I'm going to do the same thing for the RGB splitter. I'm going to run the main RGB splitter header through the bottom with the same other cables that I just mentioned. I routed all the cables through the proper holes, and the way to do that is just look at your motherboard and look where it's going to be in the case, and based off of that decide where each cable is going to go. Once you've routed all the cables and made sure that everything's plugged into the back, now it's time to put the motherboard into the case. Start by gently putting the case on its back. Then create some space for the motherboard to go in by moving the cables that are in the way, like this one and this one. Then go grab your motherboard. Make sure that your back IO is either attached to your motherboard, and if it's not, grab the piece of metal that comes in here and just put it into the hole that is here. Before you fully lay the motherboard into here, plug the CPU cable at the top right here onto the motherboard, because that will make the process much easier to plug into those cables. I did it off camera because my battery died, but just like this, plug these two cables right here to the power. Now you can align the motherboard with the standoff holes from the case. So just make sure all the cables are in front of the motherboard. Once you have the motherboard in place and the holes in the motherboard are aligned with the standoff holes on the case itself, and all your cables are now in the front and ready to be plugged in, now it's time to actually mount the motherboard to the case. And for that, you're going to use the screws that you'll find in the accessory box in any case that comes with it. Usually they have included screws. Okay, now that we have the motherboard mounted into the case, let's plug all the cables that we can plug right now just to get those out of the way. USB-C right here, USB ports, one ARGB cable, 24-pin power to the motherboard, HD audio cable, USB cable, ARGB cable, another ARGB cable, front panel cable, 5-volt fan cables, one here, another one right here. Now that you have all the cables plugged in, make sure to revisit each one of them and make sure they're plugged in all the way through so you're not worried about that later. Now it's time to install the AIO on the CPU. Most AIOs come with pre-installed thermal paste on the actual surface, but if you don't have this, they usually give you a tube to use. And if you don't have a tube, you need to go buy some thermal paste because you will not be able to put this on the CPU without thermal paste, obviously. So in this case, before you do this, you want to remove any plastic, anything that's covering the thermal paste, because we want that to contact the CPU directly. Depending on how you want the rotation of the AIO with your CPU, that's up to you really, and depends on how you mount the cooler that you have. In my case, I'm going to have it like this, so I'm going to just align it with the screw offs that I installed right here and then drop it in. Once it's on there, you want to grab these screws that hold the AIO in place. They usually look like this, and screw them into the standoffs that we put in here. And then grab a screwdriver and tighten them all the way. Then you want to wire the cables from the AIO into the motherboard. One of them is the pump or CPU fan that's going to be over here, and the other one is a USB that's going to go behind and all the way to the bottom of the motherboard, and we're going to plug it into a USB port as well. This cable is very crucial for this AIO because this is how it transmits data, the system information, and even displaying any stuff on the screen itself. And once you've connected your cables from the AIO to the motherboard, the only thing that's left to do really is to install the graphics card. And like I mentioned in the earlier, I'm going to be installing mine on a vertical GPU mount. You don't have to do this at all. I just like this because I think it looks better in any PC case. But usually if you're not doing a vertical GPU mount and you just have a graphics card, all you have to do is remove two of these brackets right here and then slide the graphics card in here into the PCIe slot like this, then plug the power cable, and then you're good to go with that. Now let's install my 49 in there. Now finally, plug the GPU to the power cable. Now lastly, turn your PC around and try to do your best to cable manage the back. And while you're doing that, make sure everything is plugged in like it's supposed to be. Once you fix up all the cables in the back, you're ready to put the back cover on and start using your new gaming PC. Let's see how this one turned out. This PC turned out so clean. I was a little bit hesitant in the beginning going to this type of case from the fishbowl case that I had before, but I've been using fishbowl PC cases or Lee & Lee style PC cases for the last, I don't know, 2.5 years, and I just wanted to change the little things up, so I went with this case, and I honestly like the design a lot, and the airflow is super nice in this case. Like, the temperatures have been really good. The 13900K is idling at 20 some degrees, which is crazy, but other than that, let me know what you guys think down below in the comments about it. And I know that I didn't include the Windows installation part in this video, but I'll leave some links down below in the description on how to install Windows after you finish building your PC. And massive thank you to iFIXIT for sponsoring today's video.